So, Mr. Davis, let's jump into the final part of today's show. And it's going to be more of a college football at large topic. We're going to discuss who we think the tier one teams are, who we think the teams are that are knocking on the door. Now, what we said earlier is we think Notre Dame's an elite team, but they're not a tier one team. So let's begin by talking about the difference, because in you and I's opinion, every team in tier one and tier two is an elite team, but there's levels to it.
Yeah.
And so you and I agreed on what we view to be an elite team, a tier one team before the show. So why don't you kick things off by explaining what makes you tier one? Because again, tier one and tier two in our category are all elite. Just like the Buffalo Bills are an elite NFL franchise. Can't beat the Chiefs doesn't make you not elite. Just means you're not the elite. That means you're just not the premier program. So let's kick things off by explaining to people what we view a tier one elite program to be and why, and you'll understand quickly why Notre Dame is not in it.
So when you asked me this question, I had to give myself parameters, right, to make it make sense. Because if I open it up for about 10 to 20 years, then I open it up to more teams, right? So I just kind of whittled it down to a 5 to 7 year span, and 3 areas: titles, talent, and then top billing, which talks about the brand power, talks about the coaching power, things of that nature. So with all of those aspects, those 3 aspects, I had 2 teams that were definite as of today, and that's Ohio State and Georgia. Definitely tier one programs, right? I had 2 programs that deserved and met the requirements, but they lost head coaches that were elite head coaches and went through a season of transition. Before this season, they definitely would have been tier one teams, elite teams, and that is Michigan and Alabama. Definitely would have been tier one. However, because of Nick Saban retiring, because of Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL, I gave them a little bit of a bye to see what the new coaches. Kalen DeBoer is an elite coach, in my opinion, right? So Alabama could be right back up there after this year. They could make a run to the national championship. Michigan, I don't have as much faith, but they have done extremely well in the transfer portal. If the quarterback situation gets solved, they definitely recruited well at the quarterback situation in the class of 25. But, those things, but or Ohio State, Georgia, tier one, without question.
So let's quickly dive into this, Shaun. We agree on Georgia and Ohio State. They're very clear there. They're literally they've won 3 of the last 4 national titles.
Yeah.
Ohio State winning the most recent, Georgia winning the 2 before. And the thing about Ohio State, too, is this was not some flash in the pan season for Ohio State. Mm-hmm. They won the title, but I would argue they've had better teams than this one, talent-wise. This year just kind of it worked out, but you're talking about a team that in the previous 6 years has gone 14-2, won the championship, went 11-2, made the Cotton Bowl, went 11-2, made the Peach Bowl, went 11-2, won the Rose Bowl, went 7-1, made it the national championship game, went 13-1, played in the College Football Playoff, lost in the Fiesta Bowl. 2018, they had a down season, and I think probably 2018 is as far back as we're going to go on this one. But the 2018 team went 13-1 and finished number 3. So their worst finish in the last 7 years was 10th. They've only had one other season outside top 5, and now they have a championship.
Yeah,
and the championship is key because they were about to get outside of my window of 10 plus years to really be a championship team.
Yeah.
And so that title got them back in that conversation. Georgia, obviously, same coaching staff that won back-to-back titles in 21-22. They won the SEC title this year. Their last year, they go 13-1. They don't make the college football playoff, four-team playoff because they got beat by Alabama in the SEC title. And so those are no-brainers. And as we said, you have to have won a championship. And so our guy Kenny Moore is talking about how Oregon should be there because they're pushing for titles every year. They've never pushed for a title.
Oregon's Luka
They
Doncic.
didn't push for a title this year. Yes, they beat Ohio State in the regular season, but they're not a tier 1 team, just like Iowa's not a tier 1 team who beat Ohio State, just like Purdue's not a tier 1 team. Like there's got to be a pushing for chance. They've never lost fewer than 2 games until this year. They beat Ohio State by a point at home, and they got slaughtered by Ohio State in the in the quarterfinals. They didn't even make the semifinals of it. They've yet to make. They made the championship game all the way back in 2014. Prior to that, they didn't make another playoff appearance until 2024 when it expanded to 12 teams. Notre Dame has literally made more playoff appearances than Oregon has in the last decade. And so, and Oregon is not a team that's pushing for titles. They're a talented team, but they couldn't even win the Pac-12 in recent seasons. And they got beat by Utah twice 2 years ago. You know, they got beat by Washington twice last year. And yet they got 1 win against Ohio State and then got destroyed by Ohio State in a rematch. So Oregon does not belong in it. And yeah, it's a premier recruiting destination, but that doesn't make you an elite team. To be a tier 1 team, you've got to have a championship, or at least played for a championship in the last decade. And if the best you can do in the last decade is a quarterfinal blowout, you don't belong in the tier 1. And if you're going to argue for Oregon, then you have to put Notre Dame in there, because Notre Dame beat Georgia.
Yeah.
You know, they beat the same Penn State team that Oregon beat, right? They have actually been in the playoff multiple times in the last 10 years. Notre Dame has now been in the playoff 3 times in the last 10 years, or Oregon's been in it once, and they were in it the same year. Notre Dame went 2 rounds further and was more competitive against the team that blew Oregon out in the playoff. So if you're going to argue for Oregon being tier 1, you got to put Notre Dame tier 1. And I'm just not doing that. So there's two tier 1s. Where you and I disagree, Shaun, is on Alabama, sort of. I put Bama there. And the reason I put Bama there is they're still Bama. They're still talented. The coach they hired is a proven winner.
Facts.
Who a year ago had his team in the national championship game and went further than Nick Saban's last Bama team. So, you know, to me, you're talking about a team that last won a title in 2020, knocked Georgia out of the playoffs in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
They had a down year this year. There's no question about that at 9-4. I'm not knocking a team out because of one down year. For me, I'm sympathetic to they got a new coach argument. If they would have hired someone other than Kalen DeBoer or Kirby Smart or Dabo, along with Kalen, I'd probably say, hey, maybe they should be out of tier 1 now. But they've won enough for me to still say, hey, they're a tier 1 team.
You see, this is where the
go
two
ahead.
guys you mentioned, they don't have that season of Kirby. The season they had this year, Kirby doesn't lose that many games.
Agree.
He doesn't lose that many games.
Agree.
Because of his familiarity.
With the league.
The league. So
right.
that was the curve. That's why I'm giving grace.
It's not 1 year.
Yeah, that's why I was giving grace. I didn't say I was taking them out.
Right.
I'm giving them grace of the 1 year to prove.
So you're saying you still have them tier 1. They're just sort of on probation.
Yeah, that's why I said they're not the same as Michigan, in my opinion.
So we still then have the same 3 teams in tier 1.
Yeah.
Then we actually are on the same page, Shaun, because you have been, because we purposely did not talk about this before the show because we wanted it to be more organic because that's the problem. Sometimes Shaun and I talk so much before the show. We're like, did we talk about that during the show?
We did
or was that
the
what we
show
talked
already.
Before?
Right.
You know, so we purposely said, okay, here's our tiers. Let's not dive into it. Let's get started because we wanted it to be more. So we actually are on the same page on Alabama. We both have them in tier 1, but they are in a bit of a probationary period.
Yeah.
Michigan, if Jim Harbaugh doesn't leave, in my opinion, would also be tier 1. And the reason I say that and not have LSU in there is because I think there was more consistency from Michigan under Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
And I know there's going to be the cheat. Look, guys, whatever. It is what it is. I mean, they won their title after the cheating thing, and I understand all that's real. But all I can go off of is what we saw on the field. And what we saw on the field is Michigan making the college football playoff 3 years in a row. They had the down COVID year. The 2 years before the down COVID year, they went 9-4 and 10-3. They were a pretty good program. They went 15-0 last year. They've dominated the Ohio State rivalry, including this year when they beat Ohio State, even though they were having a down year. I have far more concerns about whether or not Sharon Moore can get Michigan back on track than I do for Kalen DeBoer, because Kalen DeBoer has a track record. Sharon Moore does not. I don't think they recruited all that well in the last couple of years of the Jim Harbaugh era, which is also why I don't think the program that Sharon Moore inherited was as strong as it. I actually think Sharon Moore did a heck of a coaching job this year, eventually.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a little rough early, but the fact that they went 8-5 with that roster is actually, and that schedule is actually not that bad of a year. But I still don't think they have the overall talent on the roster to just get right back on track in 2025. I don't. So they're in tier 2 for me. And they're not even in the top group of tier 1 for me, or tier 2 for me, because I do think there's enough of a asterisk with Michigan's rise, with the cheating scandal, and how good of a coach I think Jim Harbaugh is, and the question marks I have about the coaching staff in Michigan, and the question marks I have about the talent in Michigan, that the title is the only reason I even have them in tier 2. The title is. And the success they had 3 years in a row is because of that. Michigan is closer to being knocking down to 3 for me than they are climbing into 1, because their situation is so unique. Whereas Alabama was a giant for a decade, and they replaced their Hall of Famer with a guy who literally just had his team in the national championship game a season ago. So that's and now again, I know they got beat by Michigan. I get it.
That's, I can understand like Michigan fans saying like, dude, you can't. In the same period, we were in 3 consecutive playoffs, won a national championship, and spanked Ohio State.
Right.
So I would definitely understand people looking at that and saying, Michigan, Michigan flat out had proved over a 3 to 4 year period that they were a tier 1 program and football team, right? And I think the difference with Michigan is you're talking about a coach versus DeBoer. DeBoer was just in the national championship losing to Michigan.
Right. To Jim Harbaugh.
Losing to Jim Harbaugh. Michigan led by Jim Harbaugh. Sharon Moore was the OC, but as a head coach, what has he done?
Right.
Right?
And
who knows, like you said, the job he did this year, getting that team to go 8-5 without Will Johnson, basically missed
no quarterback
the whole season.
All season. But see, that's partly on like some of the things that, like, in some way, Shaun, I give him a lot of credit for that team being 8-5. Because I said before the season, this is going to be a rough year. But they got a lot of talent come back on defense. Don't care, guys. No quarterback. Offense is a major question mark. But part of the reason that your offense struggled is because you failed to go out into the portal and get a quarterback. Like, some of that's on you. You know what I mean? Like, you're not a new coach that came from the outside. You're part of the staff that failed to recruit in a way where you could overcome a loss by Will Johnson, the way that Notre Dame could overcome the loss of Benjamin Morrison. Now, Jair Hill actually played pretty well when Will Johnson went out, but I still knock him too for the you chose to go into last year with that quarterback room, because there was guys out there you could have got, and so that's why
that was by choice. I think that was by choice,
right?
And you only make that move if you know you have the cushion of the national championship.
Right.
Like, I don't have to force this.
I think that was a mistake, though.
It could be,
because
you don't rush Jaden Davis. You don't rush your freshman. You let him develop, right? Because you have a guy. You don't rush him. You let him develop. Could you have gone and got a tweener? Possibly. You know already, look, we're going after this local kid that's the number 1 quarterback. I think Sharon Moore had a plan. Was it the right plan? That's debatable. But I believe he had a plan. Like, I'm not about to rush. I'm not to overspend and rush just to get back to where we just came from. I'm going to do this and lay the groundwork the right way. It's going to be a rough start, but eventually, if we do what we're supposed to do as coaches, by the end of the year, we'll be setting the tone going into the offseason.
I mean, and they did. They beat Indiana. Yeah. They lost to Indiana, but then they beat Ohio State. They beat Alabama. But my issue is this, Shaun, is you get a better one-year rental at quarterback. None of the guys on your current roster are the future, because you also know we're trying to get Bryce Underwood, and he was committed somewhere else. But if you're not going to rush Jaden Davis, then it's even more reason to bring in a veteran quarterback that he can learn from, who's actually a proven player. He would have learned a lot more from I can't even think of names they could have got, but like there's guys out there that were way better than Davis Warren and Alex Orji. And that's a bit of an issue, because how would he be doing on the recruiting right now if they went 10-3 as opposed to 8-5? And that's kind of where I'm coming from. So, and then somebody in the chat just said, no Saban at Alabama means no tier 1. The same person, my guy Kenny, who said Oregon should be tier 1. I just want to remind you
with no
that the guy at Alabama went 3-0 against Dan Lanning when he was at Oregon, including beating him twice last year. I don't understand how you can make the case that Kalen DeBoer being at Alabama means they're no longer tier 1, when Kalen DeBoer just in the last 3 years is undefeated 3-0 against Dan Lanning in Oregon. I don't understand how you can make that argument.
What's Dan Lanning's record?
The only argument you can make is a lot of recruits want to go there. So freaking what? A lot of recruits chose to go to Auburn this offseason. Doesn't make it tier 1.
No, not at all. What's his record, by the way, against Kirby? What's Dan Lanning's record against Kirby, Nick Saban, and DeBoer, Kirby, and it was somebody else. I forget the third coach. It's like 3 coaches. His record is like 1-6 or something. It's just,
I think it was Kyle Whittingham, right?
Is it Whittingham? Yes.
It's like 1-6 against
1-6 against those 3.
Yeah. Got a win over Ryan Day and James Franklin. Yeah. Nice. Okay. But then you went out and got smashed by Ryan Day in the rematch. So if you're gonna argue for Oregon being in tier 1, then you better be arguing for Alabama to also be in tier 1, since their head coach basically right now owns Dan Lanning.
I would say Oregon.
Sharon more wins over Kalen DeBoer than Dan Lanning has.
Yeah. I would argue that Oregon underachieves because of the investment they make.
Clark Lee has more wins over Kalen DeBoer than Dan Lanning has in a third of the matchups. So, did I just see that correctly? Notre Dame is the blue gold game is going to be on April 12th.
Oh, they moved it up a couple of weeks ago. Originally, it was supposed to be the 26th, right? Yeah.
That's weird.
That is weird.
Yeah, very weird. Okay.
What is that? That's like the week. Does that line up with kids being done with finals? Are they trying to keep?
No idea. We'll look more into that and talk about it later. I just saw that email come across. I
saw it as well. Yeah.
That's really weird. Anyway, so tier 1, Shaun, we're on the same page. It's Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. Alabama's on probationary status. If they don't make a significant jump this year, meaning like you're in a playoff, you're showing you're on track, then I think it's safe to remove them, because Kalen DeBoer has to prove he can win at Bama. He proved he can win at Washington. He hasn't proven he can win at Bama, because it's a different animal winning at Washington than it is at winning at Alabama than it is at Washington. So we'll go there. Tier 2, Shaun. So you and I have put tier 2 into sort of a brackets, right? There's the teams that I think are trending in a really good direction in tier 2, and teams that are sort of hanging on to tier 2 status. And I know one of these people are going to disagree with strongly, but there's 3 teams that you and I view as those next in line tier 2 teams that are beating on the door to become tier 1. And the reason that some of these don't have it is because they don't have the marquee wins that you need to get there. And here's the 3 teams in order for me. And you tell me what your order is afterwards, Shaun. Notre Dame's number 1. Texas is number 2. Oregon is number 3. Now, the reason that I have them in that order, and I thought about flipping Oregon and Texas, but Notre Dame number 1, because Notre Dame has the kind of wins that Texas and Oregon don't have yet. I don't know how you could put Texas ahead of Notre Dame. Texas has they had 2 playoff wins this year over lower ranked teams that were significantly lower than them. And then they went and played Ohio State in a competitive game, but they lost. But they also lost twice to Georgia. So Texas went literally 0 this year against teams that were on their level talent-wise. Whereas Notre Dame goes in the playoff, they go down. They have a similar win, both won on the road by 10 against Texas A&M. They go out and beat Georgia, beat Penn State, and then lose to Ohio State also by a similar margin. And I'm not one of those like, well, Notre Dame lost by less points to Texas. Texas was closer to tying that game up in the fourth quarter than Notre Dame was. Texas was at the 1 yard line with a chance to tie. Notre Dame needed a stop before they had a chance to tie. So I give them a lot of credit for how competitive they were against Ohio State, but they also lost twice to Georgia. Now, one was a close game, but I look at that. I look at him going out in the playoff last year. Yes, it's great they made the playoff last year. They beat Alabama. It's a big win. But then they got beat and outplayed pretty thoroughly by Washington last season in the national championship game. So I put Texas behind Notre Dame because Notre Dame has won some of those games Texas hasn't won, but they're all still knocking on the door trying to get there. Notre Dame has also gone further under Marcus Freeman than either Steve Sarkisian or Dan Lanning have done in Oregon or Texas. Texas has never been past the semifinals. Now, Texas has been there twice, which is why I have them ahead of Oregon. We say, well, they got there in an easy year where they had to deal with in the Big 12. The Pac-12 wasn't exactly a juggernaut in 2024 or 2023 or 2022, 2 years where they flat out should have been in the playoff one of those 2 years and couldn't get it done. And why? Because Kalen DeBoer outcoached him twice in 2023. So, but Oregon is still very talented. They did win the Big Ten this year. They did beat Penn State this year in the Big Ten title. They did beat Ohio State in the regular season game. They are firmly entrenched in that top group of my top tier 2 schools, Shaun, as is Texas. They're both recruiting big-time talent. They both have good head coaches there that have to prove that they can win the big games with consistency, and they haven't done that yet. Sark's done a lot of good things. He is, 0 against Kalen DeBoer, right? I believe he did have a nice win over Nick Saban last year. That's a good one. But he's 0-2 against Kirby. He's 0 against Ryan Day. And he's got to prove that he can kind of win those games. Dan Lanning, similar situation. You're 1-1 against Ryan Day. That gives him a leg up on Notre Dame, but you're 0-2 against Kirby. And so to me, these 3 teams all have some big things missing. Number 1, no titles, no championships. And number 2, inconsistency winning the big games. And I think Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama have shown more consistency winning those games. Now, Alabama, as we said, is a little bit of an asterisk because they haven't proven they can win those games under Kalen DeBoer, but they did beat Georgia this year. So they did have that win. They did, they still won some of those games, but they got to prove they can win them more consistently. But those are my 3 in order of the top group of the tier 2 teams that I think are on the verge of banging that door down and getting that level of being in that tier 1 program.
So I agree. I would probably Notre Dame just came off the national championship. Texas has been back-to-back semifinals. Sark, Marcus Freeman, equal to me. I totally agree. Marcus Freeman has proven going up against top coaches. He's beaten Dabo. Right. He's also beaten Kirby Smart. He's beaten James Franklin. And so, but Sark, this is nitpicking. I came at it from this standpoint because of talent and development. I would put Texas above Notre Dame because I'm looking at it like, I just look at talent, especially on the interior, the defensive line. I think the quarterback situation is better at Texas. And I'm just looking at this as like, okay, Texas, in my opinion, Texas would have the same odds to get back to the semifinals that Notre Dame would going into next year. They would be equal. If I had to look at it, who would I trust more? Would I trust the Notre Dame quarterback situation more, or would I trust the Texas quarterback situation more? That's just for me looking at it. Sure. Texas has shown an ability to get better, more elite depth on the defensive line from a recruiting standpoint. That's something else to look at. But this is nitpicking. It's like I'm not.
Which, when you're talking about big time teams, Shaun, it's gonna be nitpicking.
Yeah. So
I mean, that's gonna be the case.
So that's just me. I would put Texas above, but then Marcus Freeman, for me, being able to have teams prepared in big games makes the difference that if they got to the semifinals and they faced each other, if they had faced each other in the national championship, I would have picked Notre Dame.
Right.
I would have picked Notre Dame. So, you know, Oregon, just the program, I'll be honest. It's a program that's glitz, glamour, underachieving to me. I call them the Luka Doncic. In my opinion, they're the Luka Doncic of college football. Yeah, they could be the greatest thing ever, greatest offense, but when it comes down to it, toughness and being able to stop people defensively, I don't see it when they need to, but they can give you all the glitz, glamour, great program,
great uniforms,
different
kids from all over the country,
all of that. Invest, of course, they're going to invest. Phil Knight alone, yeah.
But I actually think that is a knock against them.
Yeah.
And that would be my pushback against Texas, Shaun, is because if all those things are true, then why doesn't Texas win more? And you even said I'd take Notre Dame over Texas, right? So, like, to me, the fact that is the question mark, and they do recruit a certain way, is why I think as a program, looking at it as a whole, like this year, I would have taken Notre Dame's quarterback over Texas's quarterback.
Yeah, but I'm projecting to next year.
But like this year's part of the conversation, and I think that I would trust Arch Manning more in September. But I am on record as saying that I thought C.J. Carr was a better quarterback than Arch Manning. I thought Arch was a very good quarterback. I had him as a top 50 guy, not a 5-star, top 25 guy. I think the name. Look, if his name was Arch Jones and his dad was a UPS driver, which like my dad was, I think he's a top 50 quarterback coming out. I do. I think he's very good.
And you have to give credit.
An elite number one overall type of guy.
Yeah. You have to give credit to, Texas has been the back-to-back semifinals.
No doubt. That's why
Notre Dame just had this one season. And
but their first one, they did it by playing in the Big 12. That's my only kind of.
I don't see, for me, that doesn't. Texas was Texas before they got to the SEC.
No doubt, but
it's like Big 12, SEC. It's a different type of run from a respect standpoint. Oh, I respect it because they did it in the SEC. From respect.
No, it's not that. It's more of a difficulty of getting there. And then, but what do you do when you get there, right? Like,
but I feel like that team could have done it the year before.
They went 8-5 years.
Talented. No. I'm saying the year that they lost to Washington in the Big 12, going to the semifinals before they got to the SEC this year. The team that made it to the semifinals in the Big 12 could have made it to the semifinals in the SEC. They were that talented.
Here's the interesting thing, Shaun. I actually think last year's Texas team was better than this year's Texas team.
That's fair. I think both teams,
talent-wise,
still could have made it. If we're talking about the playoff, they didn't have the expanded playoff.
Let me rephrase.
They made it to the
I would not
playoff.
I said better. They were more talented, not better. But that's part of my issue with Sark, is that with all the talent that you've had, you should be winning more games. That's kind of my thing. I mean, we've watched Texas in the last couple of years lose to inferior opponents. Lose to Oklahoma. I think they had more talent than Washington did last year. You knew Washington was going to win because they're the better team. I think Texas had more talent than Georgia both times they played this year. But they couldn't get it done. The thing that hurts me with Texas is I think they're still a little soft.
It's just like Oregon, in my opinion.
But I have Texas ahead of Oregon.
Yeah.
This is you and I both. You have Texas ahead of Oregon, correct?
Yeah.
I have. So that's not. We're discussing so we think Notre Dame and Texas are the next two teams out, right?
Yeah.
We're just debating, should it be Notre Dame first or Texas first? That's it.
Yeah.
We're the same with Oregon. And that to me is why when I look at Texas compared to Notre Dame, the reason I have more faith in Notre Dame is because I think Notre Dame won't get punched in the mouth and basically bow down like Texas did.
Yeah.
That's my issue. Because my thing is, with all the talent that Texas had, They still got smacked in the mouth by Georgia twice this year. Their loss to Georgia at home is by a margin of defeat worse than any loss Marcus Freeman's ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's like, because they have so much talent, they shouldn't be getting beat by Oklahoma last year. They shouldn't be getting smacked twice. You got to beat Georgia at least once. You know what I mean? Like, you had them at home in a neutral. It's not like you went and got beat in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
You got beat by 15 at home in a game where they just beat you up physically the entire game. And then their backup quarterback comes in the game and you rally behind and you beat them there. So I think that I would agree that I would give Texas the edge in NFL talent, but I don't give Texas hasn't won more big games in Notre Dame. I don't think the talent gap is enormous, and I think it's shrinking every year, not because Texas is coming down, but because Notre Dame is going up. But I also think Notre Dame's brand is every bit as big as Texas is right now because of Marcus Freeman. If they had a different head coach, then I think that I'd be a little bit more concerned about Notre Dame's ability to sustain those type of things. And somebody in the chat just said this, and I agree with it. I think Steve Sarkisian still outcoaches himself way too often.
Outthinks himself?
Yeah, and that's a knock on him a little bit, where I think Kirby did that a little bit early in his career. And then eventually was just like, we're just going to go out there and be better than you. And I think Dan Lanning does a little bit of that, where he kind of outthinks himself. He outcutes himself. And those are things that to me are why they're there. But here's the reality. All three of those teams are make this adjustment, make that adjustment, get better in this couple areas, and you're beating those teams. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'll say this, Shaun, and I want your response. There's a big gap for me. Now, I think these other three teams that we're going to discuss, there's one team that's on the verge of being with these three, and then there's a big gap between these three and the bottom two of tier 2.
Yeah. For me, you said something, and I think Marcus Freeman talks about it, but he really wants to be about it. When Marcus Freeman says this is going to be an offensive and defensive line-driven program, he's not just blowing smoke. Sark and Dan Lanning can say it, but when the rubber hits the road, that's not what they go to. That's not what they go to. That's not what shows up. A physical, rough, rugged team doesn't show up when they face another physical. When they face Utah, that Oregon team doesn't show up. When they face Georgia, that Oregon team doesn't show up. I think it's the same way. I think Texas is actually making strides. I thought Texas was really fit. That game against Ohio State was really physical. They're making strides. Wasn't like that a couple of years ago.
But it wasn't when the game was on the line.
On the line. I agree.
Yes.
When they got down there ready to tie the game up, they got cute. It's like, no.
He got pumped. He flinched. No,
but that's who he is.
He flinched.
Yes.
It's what like somebody just in the chat said, if you look at the last 2-3 years, I take Texas over Notre Dame. I just want to point out some data. Last 3 years, Notre Dame's 33-9. The last 3 years, Texas is 33-10. The last 3 years, Notre Dame has 3 playoff wins. Texas has 2 playoff wins. I just want to make sure that we're pointing out the facts. So there's no statistical.
As well.
Pardon?
Notre Dame was in the 12-team playoff. They had one of their
so was Texas
in the 14.
No, but Texas got all their wins in the same playoff that Notre Dame got all their wins.
Yes, but I'm saying if they were in a 12-team playoff, they would have probably won a couple of games to get to the semifinal.
Maybe.
You have.
We don't know that. We don't know that. All I know is that they were in the same playoff, and Notre Dame won more games than they did.
It's worth mentioning. I just think it's worth mentioning.
They're a good team. But when you look at it, again, 33-10 versus 33-9, 3 playoff wins versus 2, you got to give me something other than last 2-3 seasons on the field, they're better. I would say that Marcus Freeman's 22 team was better than Sark's 22 team. That went 8-5. Sark's 23 Texas team was better than Notre Dame's 23 team. No doubt in my mind. If they'd have played in a bowl game last year, everybody healthy, nobody opting out, Texas smacks Notre Dame in 2023, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You
But
agree?
for me, once again,
2024, Notre Dame is better than Texas.
What the 3 areas that I gave: titles, talent, and then brand top billing. Right? For me, the edge, because of talent, I was like, yo, we pick nitpicking here, but I think the roster the last 3 years has been more talented at Texas.
At certain spots, I would agree with you. At others, I would.
I'm just saying in totality.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you look at elite talent that goes to the NFL, drafted, all of those things. But you have to counter that Texas goes to the portal a lot more at different positions than Notre Dame. So I mean, it's a nuanced conversation.
The 3 we got are the same. We won't spend the rest of the time arguing where it is. And I think this year is going to separate that a lot, Shaun, of both teams are losing some key pieces. Let's see who can rebuild. But we agree those are the 3.
I think, by the way, Oregon, I just want to say this. I think the Big Ten move for Oregon should help if Dan Lanning adjusts.
If he adjusts properly to having to play Big Ten teams, that's going to help them.
Yes.
Agree. And again, we have Oregon in that top group of tier 3 that's separated from everybody else. And so they're not that far off, Shaun. Neither's Texas, neither's Notre Dame. It's just you got to make some tweaks within your program to get over that hump, no doubt. And so then we go the next group, and this is a team to me that's because of some things that have happened, I view Penn State as that next team in tier 2. Yes, I know that Michigan won the title, but as I said, the asterisks are you had a big change at Michigan. You not only lost your head coach, you lost the majority of your coaching staff and the majority of the players that led you on your run. It's like LSU's not in here. The 19 LSU team, which is in our time frame of when we look at it, would destroy any other team that we've talked about in this different coach. That was more of a flash in the pan than it was sustainability. And you and I talked about this last year with Michigan. Michigan was always going to be, if you don't do it now, it's not going to happen for a while because the roster in coming years was not going to be as good because they hadn't recruited as well as these other teams we looked at. So Penn State to me is next. When you look at the success they had in recent seasons, the reason that they're not in this conversation for me right now, Shaun, is because, again, they lack the big wins. You know, I know that they made the Big Ten title game this year, but they lost. And their quote-unquote big wins this season, and I give them credit for those wins, were over a good SMU team that deserved to be in the playoff. They over a Boise State team that was really good that deserved to be in the playoff. But there's a big difference between beating SMU and Boise State and beating Ohio State, Oregon, or Notre Dame. And that's still the big issue with James Franklin and why you could make a case that even with Michigan's issues, they should be ahead of Penn State because of that. But they showed me a little bit more fight this year than they had in the past. I think he made great hires these last 2 off seasons with coordinators, getting Tom Allen. And I said during the offseason, I thought the Tom Allen and the Andy Kotelnicki hires were really excellent. And then you lose Tom Allen to Clemson and you replace him with Jim Knowles. You upgraded there.
Yeah.
And so I think he's doing a lot of good things there. They showed me a little bit more fight this year. Yes, they lost to Oregon. Yes, they lost to Notre Dame. Yes, they lost to Ohio State, but they battled in every single one of those games. And the talent at Penn State, they've been recruiting at a very high level in recent seasons. They're always a talented team. And I think he's established a level of consistency in the last 3 years that he didn't have. Because in early his career, it's like, 2 down years and then 2 great 11-win teams with Saquon and that group. And then, a 9-4 team. And then their 19 team was a lot like Notre Dame's 19 team. Yeah, they were 11-2, but it was kind of an ugly 11-2. And then in 2020, they're a disaster in 2020. They're not very good in 2021. Last 3 years, they're 11-10 and 13 in wins.
Yeah.
And they're 34-8 the last 3 years. That's better than both Notre Dame and Texas if you just look at record. They've done that against, to me, a softer schedule. They consistently lose the big games, but they're closer now to winning some of those games than they have been in the past. They're recruiting at a high level, And I think James Franklin has figured out how important it is to have good coordinators. And he's made good hires there. So they're kind of knocking on the door of jumping in that group with Tennessee, with Texas, Oregon, and Notre Dame, but they're not quite there yet. But I do have them ahead of my next two Tier 2 teams.
Penn State for me, it's just baffling, right? Definitely has the brand power, the top billing. They definitely, especially on the defensive side of the ball, offensive line, running back, they've been able to create and recruit and develop in NFL talent. No titles, no Big Ten titles, because I would even give them more credit if they had a few Big Ten titles sprinkled in there for James Franklin. But for some reason,
16 was their last one, right, Shaun? Which is outside the 5 to 7 year window we've talked about.
Yeah. So with that being said, I agree they're Tier 2, but it's almost like I don't even want to put them in Tier 2.
Yeah.
Because I just don't believe in James Franklin. I just don't. And it's so I don't watch the end of the game. They throw the interception and James Franklin's reaction. But I want you to watch the ref that was to his left. Even the ref was just like, oh boy. Like this is a typical James Franklin Penn State way of losing this game. And it's like a huge elephant in the room. I think he's done things to solve issues, right? I have no clue why they can't recruit wide receivers at Penn State.
And the guys they have recruited, they haven't developed. And that's a recent thing because, like in 2016, they had some legit pass catchers. I mean, you had Mike Gesicki at tight end, but you also had Chris Godwin at wide receiver. You had James, or you had what's the kid's name from Jersey they had recently? The short kid, Dodson.
Jahad Dotson.
Jahad Dotson. They've had some guys. They haven't developed them. I mean, they got Caden Saunders.
But you think they would be able to get 2 or 3 in every class?
Have. I mean, how fired up was Notre Dame about maybe getting Caden Saunders a couple years ago? Just haven't developed them.
Yeah, they just haven't developed them.
So Amari Evans kid is a talented kid. I think that's more of a development thing, but I think that's something where I have zero faith in James Franklin. But why I thought this year's team was going to be better than the previous year's teams was because I thought he made the kind of coordinator hires that can overcome him. And I think that's important.
But the team is always going to be a reflection of the head coach, especially like you
which is why I don't
toothpaste, the only thing that can come out is what's in the tube.
Yeah, which is why I don't think Penn State ever wins a title under James Franklin.
No.
But they're talented enough and dangerous enough that I do have them in Tier 2, but behind because I think those 3 teams all have a shot to jump into Tier 1. I don't think Penn State does.
Let me ask you a question, because you talked about flip-flopping Jeremiah Smith, right, in the national championship game. Flip-flop Freeman and Franklin in the Orange Bowl.
I think the game would have turned out exactly the same, but reverse outcome, like 27-24, because I think that Notre Dame has better. Like Penn State had the best, like their top 3, you could argue is better than Notre Dame's top 3. I think Notre Dame from like 4 to 10 better. I mean, Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren, with all due respect to Xavier Watts and Jeremiah, those are dudes. And then, you can throw in Nicholas Singleton the way he played. But like Zane Durant's a heck of a player. And I think Notre Dame can match them, if not surpass them. But then you get past 10 and it's even more so pro Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And so I think Penn State would have won the game because of a lot of it because of some of the deficiencies Notre Dame had personnel wise with some of the guys they didn't have in the game. But I think that Notre Dame was able to beat Penn State playing a B- game at best, which we said after the show. I think, what did we say, C+, B-? They would not have been able to do that if their team was prepared and coached by James Franklin.
You see, I think the level of play that you got from Penn State would have been at the same level, but I think that would have been something extra in clutch moments
Exactly.
that would have changed
Exactly.
things.
That's why Notre Dame won at the end. And if I
Yeah.
think you flipped head coaches or coaching staffs, that same thing would have happened, but it would have been the Penn State team now making those plays late.
Yeah.
Like I could see Notre Dame still jumping up to a lead and Penn State jumping up to a lead and then Notre Dame coming back. And then late in the game, some of those decisions would have been made that would have allowed Notre Dame or Penn State to pull it off.
Which really says that James Franklin is a good coach. He's a really good coach.
Good motivator,
He's just not
good recruiter. He's just not a great in-game coach.
Yeah.
I mean, his team came out and played hard, Sean. I mean, they played hard against Notre Dame. They played hard against Oregon. I mean, the first time I really wow, this might be a different Penn State was the Oregon game. Oregon was up 28-10, and it's on the verge of just smoking Penn State, just like Notre Dame was on the verge of getting really smoked by Ohio State. And that team was just like, nope, we're not quitting. We're going to battle. And they made that a game. It wasn't a game where you ever felt they were going to win, but they battled and they kept it competitive. And I give them a lot of credit for that. So, but then let's go to the next two.
After that. So are these are teams that have a chance to get to tier 2?
These are teams that are in tier 2, but they're kind of hanging on for dear life.
Got you.
And for me, it's Michigan and Clemson. It's hard for me to put a team, even with all the changes at coaching, to completely eliminate them from tier 2 that is a year removed from a title, and that stretch included 3 straight playoff appearances.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to not have a team that's got 4 straight wins over Ohio State and not have them in tier 2. I think you could some people have made a case for them in tier 1. I'm not going to argue with you because they have the title. I don't think the talent is anywhere close to what these other teams are. I think if we're just going to talk about pure talent of what they have right now and what they'll have coming back next year, they are significantly lower than anybody else on this list, talent-wise. And that's what hurt them is that Harbaugh run. Harbaugh knew he was going to the NFL at some point in time soon. And I actually think it was a year later than he anticipated. Because remember, there was a lot of talk he was going to leave after 2023. After 2022. And he chose to come back. But the talent, he was not recruiting the same way down the stretch. And so I think talent-wise, but they did win a title a year ago. They did beat Ohio State and Alabama this season. You know what I mean? I mean, the bowl game's got, it's a bowl game, but Jalen Milroe played. Michigan had some opt-outs too. They still beat them, and they beat Ohio State in a game that mattered. I mean, Ohio State couldn't afford to lose that game. They were trying to play for the Big Ten title. They were trying to get their pride back, and they beat them. So I think those are the reasons why they're in tier 2 for me, but they're hanging on for dear life because if they don't get any better next year, then we just have to kind of accept the fact that they had a nice little run. It was a short-lived run, but they're out. That's how I view Michigan. And I want to hear your thoughts on Michigan, and then we'll talk about Clemson next.
Well, I had Michigan in tier 2. We both agreed that, we definitely would have understood them being tier 1 if, Jim Harbaugh stays as the head coach because that talent stays and they probably add to it. So tier 2 is right there. I give them the grace. You are where you are with them. I'm just going to give them grace of a year. Look at their Big Ten schedule. They get Ohio State at home. They get Indiana at home. So, and to be honest, they were, whether you want to attribute it to the quarterback play or whether you want to attribute it to less talent, despite all of that, they were in a 1-possession game with Illinois that they could have won if the ball had bounced a different way. They should have beaten Indiana, had a chance to beat Indiana on the road. Like they had opportunities to win games, to possibly be 9-5, 10-4. Really their season was that close without, like you said, making that move for a quarterback, which for me shows that Tony Alford's a darn good running back coach. Sharon Moore coaches offensive line, and he's the play caller. So you expect that Michigan O-line it got better as the season went on. I expect them to be better going. They have some really good, young talented players. That's what I saw in that bowl game. against Alabama. Like their interior defensive line next year, and they just find a way to develop linebackers. They just develop
Sure.
tough, hard-nosed linebackers. I don't know if they have the talent. I mean, the coaches on the defensive side of the ball
That they did before,
to
yeah.
be what they were before, right?
Yes.
I don't worry about. I think Sharon Moore can develop an
And
offense
that's
at
the
Michigan.
bigger issue for me, Sean,
Yeah,
is they had a
yeah,
massive coaching turnover outside
yeah,
of Sharon Moore.
yeah.
Massive coaching turnover. The reason that I'm not as sympathetic to the argument you made about some of the close wins is because I could argue they had even more games they could have lost than games they could have won. Like the one possession game against Illinois is a game where they still lost by 14.
Mm-hmm.
The Indiana game, I think they led 3-0. And then at one point in time, Indiana was close to running Michigan off the field. It was like 17-3, and then they kind of let Michigan back in. They got very lucky beating USC. They almost lost to Minnesota. They almost lost to Michigan State. And in the loss to Indiana, to me, is you were as close to losing that as you were winning that as you were to losing to Ohio State. The other thing that I would say, Sean, is, and I'm very curious your thoughts on this, if they would have lost to Ohio State, I probably would have dropped them from tier 2.
Say it again.
I think if they would have lost to Ohio State, because then they wouldn't have played Bama in the bowl game. They'd have played somebody else. If they would have lost to Ohio State and finished that year 6-6, and then play nobody in a bowl game and go 7-6, let's just say, I dropped them out of tier 2. I think that for me, that win over Ohio State showed me that, you know what, there's still some fight left in them. There's still some talent. There's still enough talent on that defense to shut down this Ohio State offense. And I know the game plan was bad and all that, but you still had to go out there and make plays. There's still enough there that I'm not ready to drop them out. But if Ohio State would have beat them and they'd have finished 6-6, that's enough of a drop off for me to take them out completely of tier 2.
You know, someone can relate to this. You know how you go into a home and you say, "Yo, we have to upgrade here and there. We got to upgrade the kitchen. We have to upgrade the bathroom. We have to upgrade here, there. But it's got really good bones." And see, that's what I felt like Sharon Moore and his program showed. Like, yeah, they did beat Ohio State. And they did do it the same way they did it under Jim. They punched them in the mouth. The program still has good bones. Now, what are the upgrades going to be? How are they going to decorate that thing?
Right.
We'll watch it play out. But the
'Cause-
program showed that Indiana game, like you said, they showed toughness. Like, yo,
Right.
they could have
They
been
quit.
thrown off the field. They didn't quit. They come back. Man, double-digit, 21-point underdog going into the horseshoe. Yo, they believe we're better than you.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, where you rank, we're still better than you, and we're going to continue to show you that we're better than you. Doesn't matter if our coach is in the pros, we're better than you because we're the same guys that have been whipping you for the last 2 to 3 years. And I think even in the Alabama game, it's like, yo, we beat you last year with Coach Saban. So, and, I just think they showed they have good bones. And that's why I give them a little bit of grace because I think, like, okay.
So you're agreeing with me. The way they finished is what kept them in tier 2.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. But even in that, if they hadn't beaten Ohio State, it would have been expected, right? I think for me, the grace comes from the fact, okay, you showed me something, right? Just like with Alabama, I think beating Georgia showed me something. Like, okay, like, yo, the fact remains.
If they'd have lost to Georgia, then we would have had to have a different conversation about where Alabama.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to find those things, those little Clemson. Interesting conversation for me.
Yeah, let's go to them, Sean, because here's my thoughts on Clemson. Clemson was descending for a couple years.
Yeah.
And they're at this point now where we're going to find out if Dabo still has it or not.
Yeah.
Because part of the reason for the descent was the talent just wasn't there. And the coaching wasn't there. He made a bad D coordinator hire after Brent Venables left. with all due respect to Wes Goodwin, is not a good hire. And it showed, especially this year. They should have been a lot better on defense this year than they were. But a couple things that I saw, because that program was on the verge of falling out completely, just like Michigan was.
Mm-hmm.
They're sitting there at 9-3. They've literally only played 3 good teams all year, and every single one of them smacked them in the mouth. They're getting ready to go play SMU in the title game, and I think they're done. I think SMU is going to beat them, and they're going to go 8-4, 9-4, and they're going to play some bowl game nobody cares about. That win over South Carolina late in the year, that loss to South Carolina late in the year, I thought was going to be sort of their
the death of
yeah. And then they went out and beat SMU, which gave them some life. Yes, they lost to Texas, but they showed me a lot of fight and playmaking ability in that game with a lot of young players that they hadn't shown the previous 2 years. That's a good Texas secondary, and Texas worked them even more than Ohio State did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was one of the best performances all year. I've seen. Like Georgia's offense didn't play well against Texas in either game.
Yeah,
they won because Texas' offense is soft. A better coordinator on defense would have let that game be a lot closer. They just got out-coached. Sark is in a different universe than Wes Goodwin as a defensive mind. The Tom Allen hire, I think, was a great offseason hire. Fantastic. Now it's about, can the offense build on what it did late in the year? Cade Klubnik is showed some things that I thought he had coming out of high school that I didn't think he had in college, because he just hadn't shown it enough. The way he played against Texas and the way he played down the stretch, he had an incredibly sneaky good year, Shaun. We use that word sneaky. This kid passed for 3,600 yards, 36 touchdowns, and had 6 picks, and also rushed for 463 yards and 7 picks. Like, a lot of people are talking about him now as a top quarterback next year, but go look at what people were saying about him like in the middle of late in the season. It was just kind of like, well, he's not. And then you're like, you get to the postseason and you're like, dude, this guy's actually put up some really good freaking numbers this year.
I've actually been watching him just from the eye, because I know you're about to run the stats. Watching him from the eye, I was like, yo, he's different. Like, he's different.
It depends on the game. I mean, I thought he ripped up some of the good teams, but like, he was terrible against Georgia. Just awful against Georgia. Didn't play that great against Florida State. He wasn't very good against Louisville. He didn't play that great against Virginia Tech, who has a decent defense. He played very well against Pitt, put them on his shoulders a little bit. Played okay against South Carolina, but then just made the big mistake late. Couldn't get the ball in the end zone when they got in the red zone. I mean, so he still had some of those big game moments, but what he was doing in those other games, he wasn't even doing that last year.
Yeah, that's for me. That's what was different.
At the end of the year, and you're just like, this kid's taking. And we forget he's just a junior. He's a true junior. You know what I mean? Like, but he took some of those steps. But the SMU and Texas, because SMU has a pretty decent defense, and Texas has one of the best pass defenses in college football, and he shredded both of them, and was making some throws in that Texas game, Shaun. We were just like, that wasn't even Texas making. I mean, like, he threw a throw to the tight end. Yeah. Where there's literally a safety behind him and a linebacker or corner in front, and he just puts that ball on a dime, and you're just like, that's not play calling. That's just like a quarterback making a throw that just not a lot of other dudes can make. Yeah. That's what was different. And they found what works with him now. Got to build on that. And the thing that excites me if I'm a Clemson fan is almost all those dudes are coming back. Now, they have some question marks at running back, and their offensive line underachieved for me this season. Matt Luke's got to get that thing going better. Yeah. Just does.
I agree.
Their defensive coaching staff is going to be important to see how they can go, because they had way too much talent on defense to be as mediocre as they were on defense this season. They had way too much talent on that defense to get bullied and pushed around by Louisville the way that they got bullied and pushed around by Louisville and by South Carolina. Look, Shaun, here's the deal, man. When you've got cats like TJ Parker and Peter Woods and Barrett Carter and who's the big kid? Cape Hart, Peyton Page, Woody Woodaz. When you got those type of guys, you should not be getting bullied the way that they did. You should not have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games where teams run for over 200 yards on you. You should not be getting gashed in the run game the way that Texas gashed you. You should not be giving up 288 to the Citadel. You should not be giving up 267 to South Carolina. You should not be giving up 236 to Stanford, 179 to North Carolina State, 210 to Louisville. Those games should not be happening when you've got that. Now, yes, they're young. I get that. They're not any younger than what Notre Dame was for the most part this year, especially in the postseason when Riley Mills went down. And that's why the Tom Allen hire to me is kind of like, I think of like a superhero movie or like an action movie where like you think the person's dead and it's, that scene where they're trying to revive them and all of a sudden it's like beep, and all of a sudden beep, beep, their heart they got revived a little bit late in the season. And I mean, and for a team that lost 2 of their last 3, think about that. We're saying this about a team that lost 2 of their last 3, but in that loss to Texas, they showed, hey, we still have some dudes. We just got to coach better.
The margin for error is much smaller, though.
Much
than
smaller
what it's been at Clemson, right?
But Tom Allen's hire, I think, could help fix that a little bit. And they've recruited better the last couple of years where they had
especially offensively.
Yes, they had taken a step back recruiting. I think they've ramped that back up. Dabo has shown that he's willing to embrace the portal a little bit more, getting a kid from Purdue at defensive end. Because I like their DNs, but what they were missing is like they were all power ends.
Power ends, yeah.
Like they had 2 deep. Like it was almost like they were starting like Khalid Kareem and like 2 Khalid Kareems at defensive end, right? Like you need your Khalid Kareem, but on the other side you need your Julian Aguar, your Dalen Hayes, right?
Yeah,
and Will Help gives them that, and so I like that compliment a lot more. So if Tom Allen can kind of get them rolling this year, and the talent's there, they're going to have some losses. Obviously, they're going to lose. I believe Barrett Carter's done, right? I think his career's over. But they got some really talented kids coming down the pike, Shaun. And I think that hire, to me, was the thing that resuscitated them a little bit for me, is because I do think the talent's there. I didn't know if Dabo had it in him to make that kind of move because Dabo's a very loyal coach to a fault. And making the move that he made, I think resuscitates them a little bit. So they stay tier 2 to me.
Yeah.
I know that they have their title is just on. I mean, next year, after next year, their 2018 title doesn't mean anything to me anymore.
Yeah.
But within the 7 years, so 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18. So in the 7 years we've talked about, they won a title in 18. They made the playoff and they played for the title in 19 and lost. They made the playoff in 20, and they made the playoff in 24. They've made the college football playoff 4 times in the last 7 years. Now, they're further away from the title, but even if you take that title team away, that's still 3 other playoff appearances, including this year. Now, of course, they backed in a little bit, but they did what they needed to do and beat a good SMU team to get there. So they are on their hold on being in tier 2 is a lot like Alabama's in tier 1. This year needs to show us that you're on the way back up. Not that your record's better, but you got to start beating some of the good teams because last year they went 1-4 against good teams.
Yeah.
For Clemson, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And if they do that again, then you're gonna see a little bit of a step back. Here's the thing, Shaun, they have that opportunity this year. In game 1, they get LSU. They got to play they play SMU at home. They got to play at Louisville. They got to play at South Carolina. So they're going to get their shot this year to kind of show, hey, we're not that team anymore. We're going to get back to where we've been. And if coach can't get them back to that this year, then you have to start to say, look, they're a good team still, but they're not that team.
But they're not that team they used to be. Yeah. I think for me, it's obvious that all the titles are almost out of reach of that 5 to 7 years. I don't think the talent top to bottom is the same. I think the program, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Dabo has definitely built his program on recruiting, definitely toughness, defense, strong defensive line, and a superior quarterback play. Right? That's when they were at their apex as a program. The quarterback play has taken a step down. I think the kids showed mental toughness that I didn't see previously. Talking
And
about
some
Cade
playmaking
Klubnik.
ability too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that bodes well. I think he'll have confidence. I think he'll get better, but how much is better? How much is that going to be? And is it going to be enough?
Let me ask you this, Shaun. If he just does what he did last year, I think he's better. Because here's my difference for Clemson. For Cade, all I need you to do is just do what you did last year for most of the season and what you did late. What changed for me late in the year wasn't even necessarily that Cade got better, is he finally wasn't a one-man show. You saw Antonio Williams is healthy. Freshman TJ Moore, who Notre Dame tried to get, who we loved coming out, he started to kind of get right. The talent around him was better, and then he could be that. Because, like, to me, Cade was always a five-star player because of what he had up here, not because he had this elite physical tools. But he could be a great point guard. John Stockton is a Hall of Fame point guard. There's no question about it. But is he a Hall of Fame point guard if he just spent his whole career with the Nuggets back then, as opposed to the Jazz with Karl Malone and then eventually, Jeff Hornacek? And to be a great point guard, you got to have somebody throw the ball too. And that the thing is, to me, for Cade, is he finally, after tons of injuries the previous 2 years as a receiver, they started getting everybody healthy again. And then the recruiting a receiver last year, like some dudes that were like kind of their guys the year before and early in the year, like Troy Stiletto, were kind of passed up. That's why Stiletto jumped in the portal for the playoff and nobody noticed because he'd been passed up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's what, for me, is like, dude, if you just keep doing what you're doing, the talent around you should be better in the pass game. Your line should be better. All those young receivers are coming back. Like, that's what kind of has me a little bit fired up about.
And that is my main issue with them moving forward, is that they became more explosive in the passing game, right? They definitely shifted the type of wide receivers and how they recruited. They upgrade the talent, they upgrade the speed and explosiveness. But now, Matt Luke, the greatest help for Cade would be an offensive line and a run game. And that because that plays into what you want to do defensively, right? Because he's not Trevor, he's not Deshaun, so
he's not even Taj Boyd.
Yeah,
in my opinion,
and
that's not a knock on him.
But
like, Taj could kind of put that team on his shoulders a little bit in a way. Cade can be an outstanding point guard,
exactly,
but he is a John Stockton type of point guard. He's a Dennis Johnson type of point guard. He's a Jason Kidd type of point guard, not a scored Steph Curry.
DJ did win a championship with the Supersonics.
He won two.
With Boston, yeah.
But he was a great facilitator.
Yeah.
That's what made DJ great. DJ wasn't scoring like Dennis Johnson. The late great Dennis Johnson was not a Hall of Famer because he was a guy that would go out there and score, 40 a game. I mean,
he scored more in Seattle,
or 30 a game. But even in Seattle, like, what year they won the title? It was 78, 79. He scored 15.9. He never scored 20 a game. He scored 15.9. That's almost the same amount he scored in 84 with the Celtics when they beat the Rockets. Or no, when they beat the Lakers in 84. But he was a guy that was that leader, that facilitator. He made everything kind of ran through him.
Yeah.
And he won the finals MVP that year and scored 20 in the postseason for them that year.
Yeah.
But he wasn't Steph Curry. He wasn't that kind of guy that could he wasn't going to go out there. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's different ways to be a great point guard. And there's the facilitators.
Yeah.
And then there's the dominators. Stocktons, the Jay Kidds, the Dennis Johnsons of different eras. They were all great facilitators. They could score when they needed to, but they were great facilitators. John Stockton could have scored more if he wanted to, but he was never going to be Steph Curry as a scorer.
Never.
And that's what I mean. And Cade Klubnik is more in that mold as a point guard quarterback, where some of the other guys they had were more take a game over type of guys. Like they were put everybody on their shoulders, and like Cade Klubnik is never going to do what Trevor Lawrence did against Ohio State in 2019, which is nothing's working, so I'm just going to put this thing on my shoulders
and win it.
It's just not him, and that's okay. That's not a knock on. There aren't many guys like that. But what he can be is if you give him some dudes to get the ball to, then all of a sudden now you're like, this guy's pretty good player. And that's what I say is John Stockton was a Hall of Fame talent, but he was made a Hall of Fame player because he had someone with him that could allow him to play his game, which was feed me the ball.
Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree. I think one of the biggest Maffa was hurt and the offensive line wasn't playing well. I think if they had a run game that could take the ball out of Texas' hands early in that game and allow Cade and the receivers to get into the game in the second half and make explosive plays, that would have been the perfect complement to them offensively. And, as talented as they are with the receivers and the tight ends, Brennan School, is he come back?
No, he was in the Senior Bowl. He's gone.
Okay. They usually replace him with good tight ends. They've
been pretty good about that.
They've had good tight ends. But if they can get a solid run game and that offensive line can just complement the talent they have a wide receiver to be able to take a little pressure off Cade in certain situations, it's like, dude, it was just great for Notre Dame to just come out like, yo, we got to make a statement here. We got to go down and change the tone. So we're just going to hand the ball off. We're going to set the tone, run the ball, and then allow Riley to kind of make plays when necessary. And that is, what I would wish as a Clemson fan that Matt Luke could start to establish with that offensive line. And then the running backs, which you said is going to be a big question for them as well next year.
Yeah.
So what we got next? We got I'm excited to talk about the final.
The who?
The final group. When we're going to talk about who can jump up.
Yes. So who are the teams, Shaun, and we'll be a little briefer with this one.
Right.
Who are the teams that you view as not like in theory, Miami can be a tier 2 team, but Miami is currently constructed. Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, not what are programs that in theory could be, but what are the teams that right now, based on what they've done, where they're trending, whatever the case may be, are teams that have a chance to jump into that tier 2 category and why? So I'm very curious. List me the teams that you kind of view to be that, and we'll have some fun with this last one because this is going to be a lot more of a of an interesting conversation.
Just using the same criteria. I use the exact same criteria, right? Titles, brand, right? I really believe that Texas A&M under Mike Elko has an opportunity to jump up into tier 2 over the next couple of years. I just always feel like LSU has an opportunity. Like, they just do, right?
They're on my list.
The state is fertile with talent. They always have talented teams.
They're in the SEC championship game 2 years ago.
2 years ago, they can make the right hires. This one is a long shot. And I think it's a long shot because I really believe in the coach and the staff that he's put together, but I'm not sure if he can keep things rolling. I really love what I'm seeing from Arizona State and Coach Dillingham. I really do. I really think they can kind of establish themselves possibly as that top team in the Big 12 moving forward. I really do. I really respect what he's done. I respect the toughness of his team. You know what I'm saying? Because they were on the verge of being blown out by Texas. And that's when you see like the bones of a program. Like what are these players holding on to? And they did that without their explosive number 1 wide receiver. Their quarterback, I just really think the way they're recruiting, from what I'm hearing, they're doing a fantastic job out west. in Las Vegas, Nevada, Arizona. Texas. They're really racking up, doing a great job in recruiting. But they're more of a long shot to jump up. But like for me, Texas A&M, I think Indiana is along the lines of being a long shot. But I think for them just to be that third team in the Big Ten would be like okay, because if you're that third team in the Big Ten, then you're flirting with the playoff. So
Well,
for them,
yeah, they're 4 right now based on
right,
last season, right?
right.
Yeah.
So if they can, but they would have to overcome Penn State, which they're a
I
long way
think if
away
you
from
can
that.
consistently be 4th in the current Big Ten, you're a pretty darn good team.
Yeah.
Because I mean, look, again, you're going to be a playoff team every other year. Worst case,
Absolutely.
if you're legitimately the 4th best team in the Big Ten, like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd say. I need to
I
see them
wanted to
do it
go.
with a team that's not built on portal guys that they brought with them from the previous school. I need to see that he
Yeah.
can build a team without. He's a heck of a football coach. That staff, he's got
Mm-hmm.
a lot of good football coaches on that staff.
Yeah.
I just got to see, like, if Joe Rudolph left, people say, who would you go for? I'm like, the Indiana's Bob Bostad, who they should
Yes.
have hired in 2018 when
Mm-hmm.
Harry left. That's who I wanted them to hire then. I would have hired him when Marcus Freeman took over if Harry Easton didn't want the job. But anyway, it's a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah. And then some other teams, I'll let you jump in because those are the two automatics for me. I don't know if I trust the coach, but I think from a talent standpoint, South Carolina's done some really good things. They just they just had these moments where
Yeah.
I have no clue how they lost to Illinois. Like I watched that game and I'm like,
because their coach had an emotional breakdown because he's
yes,
an emotional infant. And that's what happens. I mean, like this is the best you're going to get. 9-4, beat some good teams, lost to some other
yeah,
good teams, but they're just until he grows up, and the dude's in his 40s.
yeah,
But you say teams are a reflection of their head coach.
right,
Other coaches know how to tweak him,
yeah,
and then when he starts losing it, his team kind of loses it.
yeah.
That's
I
just
think
kind of that's
Tennessee is
why they're like this,
yeah.
South Carolina, and I think they get players.
Mm-hmm.
They got competitive NIL, but he's the reason they've improved, but he's
Yeah,
also the reason they can't go any further, in my opinion.
yeah. I agree.
I just don't think he has the maturity to be that. And I actually had several SEC teams. We agree on A&M.
Yeah, Tennessee, I think.
Talent is going to upgrade.
Yeah,
LSU we agree on.
yeah,
I'd put Tennessee in that tier 3
yeah.
that's on the verge.
verge. Yeah.
They did playoff this year. Yes, things
Mm-hmm.
didn't go well, but they beat Bama.
Yeah.
They had some quality wins.
Mm-hmm.
Their schedule was not daunting. I don't think they were as good as maybe some people thought they were, but they've got now 2 wins over Bama in the last 3 years.
Yep.
One of them over Saban and Bryce Young. He's recruiting well. He has to show me he can kind of take that next step. But the thing about that Coach Heupel's got to show me is he can build an identity. And I think he's really struggling with that. Now, what he's done a good job of, Shaun, is being smart enough to say, this is what my talent is, and I got to coach to that talent. But, like, at what point in time do you start recruiting with some level of consistency that I can identify what you want to be?
Yeah.
Like with Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock, I can say, listen, what we saw this year was Mike Denbrock coaching to what he has, not what he wants.
Exactly.
And that's the sign of a good football coach. But that's not what Mike Denbrock wants to be, and we can identify that based on how they're recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
With Josh Heupel, it's like, I don't know what you're trying to build to with your recruiting. Because sometimes I think you're trying to be more of a balanced offense. Sometimes I think you're trying to be more of a throw-it offense. I that's my big question with Josh Heupel. If he can figure out and create an identity with their program about who do you want to be? Do you want to be a tempo team that spreads it out? Do you want to be a team that's more balanced? What do you want to be? And then recruit to it. Then I think they can jump because you can recruit there. They've had enough success in recent years. They're probably a 12-team playoff team in 2022
Yeah.
with Hendon Hooker, right? And yeah, you can't beat Georgia, in 2022, but you beat Bama. And then you can't beat Georgia this year, but again, you beat Bama. You know, you've had some good wins over some other good teams. You smacked Oklahoma this year, who ended up not being good, but at the time it was considered a big game. So I look at Tennessee and say that they've got a shot if he can just establish some level of consistency of who they're going to be as a team.
Yeah.
And because they can recruit there, they've got resources. It's a good in-state school. Ole Miss, I have major doubts about Lane Kiffin's ability to establish anything consistent. But this is the first time they've had back-to-back 10 wins under him. And even though they underachieved this year, they did win 10-plus games. I need to see him do it again next year before I start believing they're in tier 2, because this team should have flat out been better than they were. There is no excuse that this team went 9-3 in the regular season.
LSU lost. The LSU lost.
And then losing to Kentucky,
yeah,
at home. Like, you go out there and smack Georgia. I mean, smack Georgia. And you smack South Carolina on the road. And then you get beat by Florida. You get beat at home by Kentucky.
Yeah.
You lose to LSU in a game where literally LSU's only lead that entire game is the overtime touchdown that won it. That's the only time LSU led the entire game. That's the issue. And you talk about the same thing with Lane Kiffin that I talk about with Shane Beamer. Yeah. Different personalities, but his immaturity and his lack of what I believe is a level of focus and attention to detail needed in a football team. And this is my issue with Stark, but Stark's further along. I still wonder if Sark is a head coach or is he a great offensive mind? Is Sark Lincoln Riley, or is he, a guy that can go out there and win a title because he's a great head coach? Yeah. And Lane Kiffin definitely is that way. He just thinks it's me showing everyone how smart I am.
Yeah.
And that's why his team is so schizophrenic week to week, because there's no consistency. There's no identity. Like the one thing I give Marcus Freeman a ton of credit for is after that Northern, there just was a level of steadiness. Mm-hmm. We're approaching every game this way. And there was a level of focus and a maturity with Marcus Freeman where he's inexperienced, but he's mature in how he goes about his business on a daily basis. Yeah. Lane Kiffin is much older than Marcus Freeman. He's a lot more experienced than Marcus Freeman, but there's a level of immaturity that's always been there. Yeah. And his team plays exactly like his personality. And that's what I think holds them back. But if he can figure that out and correct that, they quickly jump into that because they can acquire talent.
Yeah.
And he is a great offensive mind. If he ever figures that out, they could jump into tier 2, even though right now they're not sniffing it. In my opinion. SMU in the ACC is an interesting team to look at because of where they're located. That program has money.
Yeah.
There's tons of talent down there. The brand is obviously the thing holding them back. They did get some big wins this year. Can Rhett Lashley build on what they did this season? They're one that they're not there yet, but I got my eye on them. Miami is a team that I would put in this conversation. They're a lot like Tennessee. Who do you want to be? Because you've now gone out and got completely different quarterbacks in multiple years to run your show. And who do you want to be as a football team? And can Mario Cristobal establish a sort of toughness within his program, mental toughness needed to be a winner? That's a great question. The brand is there. They can certainly recruit there. The fan base will support them if they're good. That's how Miami fans are. They'll be there if they're good and they're playing a good team. But they're not there yet because they don't have the big wins, and they're still just too inconsistent as a program. Right now, Georgia Tech's beating them 2 games in a row. It's unacceptable. You just got beat by Fran Brown. Fran Brown just schooled you. You both had portal quarterbacks. Why? You know what I mean? Like, you were up, what was it, 21-0? Right? 14-0?
Yeah, 14-0. No, I think it was more than that.
It was Syracuse and you blew that lead?
Yeah.
No, that can't happen.
But I think, once again, it goes back to who are you at the core of your program, right? Cam Ward covered a lot of holes.
Yes, he did.
and a lot of weaknesses that you still have not figured out.
Right.
You still have not figured out in-game coaching and adjustments. That's what cost you games the year before that you had.
It was
Within the
21-0, by
lost.
the way, Shaun.
Yeah,
It was.
it's crazy. So Carson Beck, I don't think is going to be. He's not going to cover up that much.
No.
He's not going to cover up that much.
He needs to have the talent around him, and then he can distribute.
Yeah, but they lost 2 wide receivers. Restrepo's going to the NFL. So now what are your skill position players going to look like? You're going to bring
Martinez
back
is gone.
Martinez is gone. Your O-line, you bring back the interior. There's going to be a veteran interior. But I don't know who you are.
Right.
Right? And your defense has been nowhere to be found in the biggest games.
Yeah. And you can blame it on the coordinator all you want, but that guy was a good coordinator before he got there. But when you go out there and buy a roster, like Miami is the negative definition of buying a roster.
Buying a roster, yes.
Because Ohio State went out and said, we have a great foundation. We got to buy that guy, that guy, that guy. And I made this case going into the playoff. Ohio State didn't buy a lot of players. They paid a lot of money for specific players that brought specific needs to their football team. But those guys were stepping into a culture that already existed.
Yep.
Where Mario Cristobal doesn't have an established culture.
No.
He's just going out there playing rent-a-team every year. And a lot of the guys he's getting simply because they gave them boatloads of money, not because there's buy-in to the culture of what they're trying to do there. And there's guys that Miami has that Notre Dame let walk because they knew they weren't fits okay, yeah, that guy's talented, but he's not what we're looking for as far as a kid that is bought into what we're trying to do here. No, I'm not talking about Justin Scott because I know that's probably where people are going to go to. That's not what I'm talking about. But that's the thing is like you're trying to buy a roster every year and there's no method to your madness. You're just buying talented players. You're not actually building a team. And that's the difference between what Notre Dame has done in the portal, what Ohio State has done in the portal, what Penn State has done in the portal, what a lot of the teams that are what Texas has done in the portal. I mean, Texas has done a lot more portal acquisitions than what Notre Dame and Ohio State have done, just volume-wise, but they found the right fits. And those guys are bought into what they're trying to accomplish as a team. And that's why they win with all those portal additions. And Miami's just going out there and getting mercenaries.
Yeah.
And they're more USC than they. And let's be real. To your point, Shaun, if they had anyone but Cam Ward at quarterback this year, they would have looked a lot like USC.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they don't come back against Cal if it's not for Cam Ward. They don't come back against Virginia Tech if it's not for Cam Ward. I mean, he was now again. I have my issues with Cam Ward, and against Cal, he kind of put them behind, but they're losing that game if anyone else but him is their quarterback. And to your point, Carson Beck's not that type of quarterback. Even before the injury, that's not who he is. So Miami is definitely not there, but Miami's the kind of program, Shaun, that if you figure it out, it takes one season for them to get going because there's enough talent there and enough of a recruiting base that just one good offseason puts them on the cusp, and then that next season, they're in there.
Yeah.
That's the thing about Miami is why I have them in the conversation, but they're near the bottom of that list. I don't have anyone else. I think Arizona State's the only Big 12 team that I think right now as they're currently constructed, meaning like, okay, and there's a lot of teams that if they fire this coach and hire that guy, but just who they are, BYU is capped at a top tier 3 team.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado's capped as a tier 3 team. Iowa State's capped as a tier 3 team. Arizona State's that one team that's located appropriately with their current coaching staff.
Yeah.
That you could say they can tap into Texas talent. They can tap into Cali talent. Arizona's getting better. They've got a coach that kids like to play for. That he understands that he just the way he relates to players, they like him, they want to play for him, and he established a level of physical and mental toughness that is missing in a lot of places. But the thing that separates Arizona State from those other teams, because Chris Kleiman does a lot of the same stuff, mental and physical toughness. Matt Campbell establishes a lot of that same stuff from a mental and physical toughness. The difference is Arizona State has an ability and a potential from a talent acquisition that Colorado and Iowa State and Kansas State and Kansas, who all have really good football coaches, can't do because they're just limited as a program. I think Utah would be the only other one that could potentially jump back into tier 2, but they're not there now. That's the only other Big 12 team that I think has a chance. I said Arizona State's the only one, but I forgot about Utah. They're not far removed from being bottom of the tier 2, Shaun, but they got to get back on track quick.
If they can improve the talent and get it back to where it traditionally is, USC could be a tier 2 team. They could, because they have the brand power. They have they don't have the titles in the last.
Would you say they're a lot like Miami, that it takes one good offseason with the right staff to turn that thing around?
Yeah. They have, and Lincoln Riley, look, he has his flaws. But he's a great play caller, and he's one of those guys. Is he a head coach, or is he a really good play caller / offensive coordinator? And he got a really good GM.
Yep.
He has a really good GM right now. So let's see what Chad and he and Chad can cook up.
Yeah. So somebody mentioned Jedd Fisch, and they said he can really coach. I'm not sold yet on Jedd Fisch. He's had one good season at Arizona, and it was a heck of a season, but he went 5-7 the year before that. They went 6-7 this year.
Mm-hmm.
He went 1-11 his first year, took over a bad situation. Like, what evidence do we have that he's a good coach besides one good year at Arizona? He's got to show me a lot more to say he can coach. He had one good year, and that's it. A lot of teams have one good year.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that now if they build and play better this year, but like in all their wins were at home when teams had to travel across 3 time zones to come play you. They'd go on the road and look like a completely different team. He's got a lot he's got to prove to me that he can be there, in my opinion, Shaun, especially now that he's in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's a different brand of ball, and I don't know that they're going to be able to play that football. So that's another one. I think that's a good amount of teams to look at. Again, Andrew, I don't dispute anything about the job he did in 2023. I think he did a great job in 2023. My point is, when you have a now 4-year track record and only one of your seasons was good, okay, well, are you Mel Tucker? Or are you a guy that can win? Mel Tucker did it once, and then everything else around that was a train wreck.
Yeah.
Right? Like there needs to be more than one good season to show me that you're a guy you can flat out coach.
It's levels to this.
Right. And so that doesn't mean he didn't do a great job last year at Arizona. He did. And it wasn't a fluky 10-3. I mean, that's some good wins in 2023, but it's just one good season. That's my point. I need to see it more.
If Washington was going into the Big 12 versus Washington going into the Big 10,
maybe we're having a different conversation.
Maybe we're having a different conversation because Arizona State went to the Big 12.
Right. But for me, Fish specifically still has a lot he has to prove to me to show me he's a really good coach.
Yeah.
One season doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
And now maybe if he stayed at Arizona, they'd have been a lot better this year. Maybe. I don't know. But he didn't. He left and they took a step back. Yeah. Like to me, I'd say Lance Leopold is another guy like that. That's a guy that can flat out coach.
Yeah.
He's just at a place where you're always going to be a little bit limited from a talent standpoint. So that's kind of where I'm at. And again, I don't think that going 6-7 at Washington this year was some great achievement. I mean, they got plenty of transfers. They still had some kids coming back. And they lost some games they shouldn't have lost, Shaun, if we're being honest about it. So that's the thing is he could be a great coach. Yeah. What I'm saying is he's got to show me more than one 10-3 season. And again, him going 10-3 at Arizona is not something that Arizona does often, but let's not act like it never happens at Arizona. I mean, let's not act like it wasn't that long ago that Rich Rod had them in the Pac-12 title game. I mean, and remember that 10-4 Arizona team in 2014 that lost by 2 to USC, lost on the road to UCLA, lost to Oregon in the Big 12 or Pac-12 title game, but they beat Oregon in the regular season at Oregon. They beat a ranked Utah team that year on the road. They beat a ranked Arizona State team that year. So that's not an anomaly. It doesn't happen often, but it's happened before. And so Fish may be a good coach, but I just need to see a lot more from him. One winning season in 4 years is at Arizona and Washington is not like, oh my gosh, you're a phenomenal coach. This year, I think will be a lot more telling about how good of a coach he is than last year. I'll be honest about that. I'm just simply saying before I start putting him in that category, I got to see him do more than just one good season.
And I think he put a list of guys up there. I would agree. I mean, I'm an Illinois alum, fan. I love Brett Bielema. And the work he did at Wisconsin. But when he got his chance in the SEC, I mean, it's levels. I think Brett Bielema could just be a really good Big Ten Tier 2 football coach. Like give him a Tier 2 Big Ten team based upon O-line and D-line play, and he's going to be an amazing coach. You take him out of that pond and put him in the bigger pond with bigger fish. We have evidence of that. But he's a really good coach. I'm extremely happy with him as a head coach. Extremely happy. If he was on a short list for Notre Dame, would I feel the same way? Probably not.
No.
And that doesn't mean he's not a really good coach.
Right.
Just doesn't mean he wouldn't be my first choice on this level.
Right.
So, but even with PJ Fleck, great job in Northern Illinois. I think he's doing a fantastic job at Minnesota. But would I want him on a short list?
I would somewhat disagree with that part. I don't think he's doing as good of a job, but
he's not rowing the boat as fast as you would like him to.
He's a clown. But yeah, that's kind of
night sweater vest.
You know my stance on
yes.
He's a lot more style than he is substance, in my opinion. But the point stands though, Shaun, because some guys are just at their level, and some programs are at their level. And that's kind of, Matt Campbell is not a Tier 3 coach, but he's at a Tier 3 program. Lance Leopold's not a Tier 3 coach, but he's at a Tier 3 program. He's actually at a Tier 4 program. He's just turned him into a Tier 3 program under him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is like the Tier 2 is teams that are like, those are your top 10 to 12 to 15 teams that could maybe potentially be knocking at Tier 1. And these teams are not that. So, Shaun, we're going to wrap up that part. We do have a couple. We're going to do a mini mailbag with some of the ones that we have in there right now. But before we do that, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe. That's what I love doing shows, Shaun, because we can literally just talk about this for another hour and just have a blast with it. But do us a favor, folks. When you you see that little thumbs up button down there, go ahead and hit that for us. Hit that like button. And, of course, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.oursbreakdown.com. A lot of good stuff going on over there. Recruiting is going to start ramping up here as soon as they get the GM hire. Off season is going to get now the stinking blue gold game's a little over 2 months away now, so that's going to be interesting. But lot going on here at Irish Breakdown. So make sure you sign up for our premium membership at boards.irishbreakdown.com.